Implementing and managing authentication. These are important things in the scope of Microsoft 365 and Azure AD. And in this video today, we are going to continue our journey on learning Azure AD and M365 from the very beginning. We're going to be looking at things like configuring multi-factor authentication, like setting up the authentication methods within Microsoft 365, such as FIDO2 keys, passwordless, and so on and so forth. Lots to cover here. We're going to touch on conditional access as well, briefly, as we talk about MFA. We're going to look at monitoring things like the sign-in logs and SSPR and password protection as well. Let's get stuck in. Right then, so back to our study guide for exam MS-102, Microsoft 365 Administrator. We are making great progress on this exam guide. If we scroll down, we can see how far we've come. So we've done all of the deploy and manage a Microsoft 365 tenant section. We are well into implementing and managing identity and access. We've done this first section with Azure AD synchronization, and we are now looking at this third section here, which is implementing and managing authentication. We have 5 bullet points to get through in this section, so let's see how quickly we can get through these, but not too quickly, because we want to be diligent and thorough always. We're going to be looking at how to implement and manage authentication methods. This is going to include Windows Hello for Business. It's going to talk about passwordless authentication, tokens, including things like FIDO2, and the Microsoft Authenticator App as well. We'll also look at implementing and managing self-service password reset, or SSPR. You may remember that this is something that we had the checkbox for in one of the earlier videos when we set up Azure AD Connect. We will look also at implementing and managing Azure AD password protection, implementing and managing MFA, and finally, we'll take a look at how we can investigate and resolve some authentication issues within Azure AD. So without any further ado, let's get started. So we will start first with Windows Hello for Business. Now, this is where we can replace passwords with strong two-factor authentication. And specifically things like facial recognition and other metrics of things that you are, like your fingerprint scanner, for example. So Windows Hello for Business is something that you configure from within the Intune portal at intune.microsoft.com, or it probably still will respond to endpoint.microsoft.com as well, because the name of this admin center has changed not too long ago, now known as the Microsoft Intune Admin Center. And where we need to go here to get to this part is we need to go into Devices and then navigate down to By Platform and into Windows and click onto Windows Enrollment. And we can see here that there are a lot of things that we need to consider within this section of Intune for Windows Enrollment. Now, these are things for other videos going forward, but for the context of this particular video, we're wanting to look at Windows Hello for Business. And we can see here that when we go in, we have a flyout panel, and we've got some content that is grayed out. That's because the feature is not yet configured. And we have to specifically enable it by these two drop downs here. There are two that we can choose from, and if we hover over the little information icons there, we can get some further crucial information about what these settings are going to do for us. So for this one, configure Windows Hello for Business. If disabled, the user cannot provision Windows Hello for Business, except on Azure Active Directory joined mobile phones, where provisioning may be required. Not configured will honor configurations that have been done on the client. That configurations done on the client, that is terrible grammar. Anyway, I'm not here to be grammar police. Then we have use security keys for sign-in. So if we hover over this one, use security keys for sign-in provides the capacity for remotely turning on or off Windows Hello security keys for all computers within a customer's organization. So there we go. That's what these two settings relate to. So we shall go ahead and look at the drop-down options for configuring Windows Hello for Business. And we have three options here. We have not configured, which is what we have now, and explicitly enabled, or we can even explicitly disable it. So what we will do is we'll go ahead and enable it. And when we do this, we get some more options here. Now, I will say that this isn't the friendliest of user interfaces here. It would be nice if you could expand this out a little. Maybe as if we collapse the... No, not at all. It sort of is what it is. We'll have to work with this. So we've enabled it, and we've got this very little space here with which to work. So, and again, we get these little information guides here about all the settings and what they mean. So our first option here is, do we want to use Trusted Platform Module, or TPM? Now, what this does, if you're not familiar with it, TPM is something that provides an additional layer of data security. And if set to required, then only devices with an accessible TPM will be able to provision Windows Hello for Business. If set to preferred, which is the option we have set at the moment, then devices attempt to use a TPM. But if not available, will provision using software. So these are the two choices we have here. So depending on your situation, you might want to select preferred, or if you want to be stronger in your requirements, then hit required. We'll leave this one as preferred for the moment. Now, with Windows Hello, we have a PIN as one of the options to authenticate your identity when logging into Windows. So we can set our minimum and maximum PIN lengths here. So we've got some settings that we can work towards, and we can choose the lowercase letters and uppercase letters within the PIN codes as well, and special characters. And on all of these, let's just click some of the drop downs here. We've got not allowed, allowed, or required, so we can choose those as is necessary. Special characters within a PIN. PIN expiration days. How long do we want to set that to be before a PIN expires and it has to be reset? So if configured, the user will be forced to change their PIN after the set number of days. The user can still proactively change their PIN before expiration occurs, though. We have this option here to remember PIN history, and if set to remember, then the user will not be able to reuse this number of previous PINs. So we can set that option there to be a specific number depending on your preferences. Do we want to allow biometric authentication? So if allowed, Windows Hello for Business can authenticate using gestures such as face and fingerprint, but users must still configure a PIN in case of failure. Now, this to me is the whole point of enabling Windows Hello for Business. I think taking advantage of things like biometrics, facial recognition, fingerprint recognition is one of the key features of enabling Windows Hello for Business. But it's important to remember that it's not that it's all about. It is capable and indeed must still have a PIN configured in case of failure. So important to remember. We then have a setting here to use enhanced anti-spoofing when available, not configured, yes or no. So anything to do with anti-spoofing, I always, as a security and compliance professional, I always think is absolutely crucial. And if yes, then devices will use enhanced anti-spoofing when available. If no, anti-spoofing will be blocked. Not configurable on configurations done on the client. I really don't like that grammar, but that's by the by. But in case you don't know, anti-spoofing relates to email for the most part, and an example of that is when you get an email in your inbox and it appears to come from yourself, but you know that it hasn't. So spoofing is when somebody is able to use your email address for various purposes. There are occasions where spoofing is actually intended. An example of that could be, for example, sending an email from a multifunction device. So when you're scanning something in and then it's sent to the user's inbox, then that would be an example of safe spoofing, if you like. But there we go. Where were we up to? The spoofing. We've got two more settings in here. We've got allow phone sign-in. If allowed, users within Azure Active Directory joined desktops may use a portable registered device as a companion for desktop authentication. So the companion device must be configured with a Windows Hello Business PIN. So we can set that to yes or no as needed. And then finally, use security keys for sign-in. Now, this is one of the two initial drop-down options that was available, before we enabled Windows Hello itself. So we already read this one out earlier, but just as a reminder, this is use security keys for sign-in. Provides the capacity for remotely turning on or off Windows Hello security keys for all computers in an organization. So we can configure that to be not configured, enabled, or disabled. Okay, so we'll enable that one. And then when you're happy with your settings, you can go ahead and click on to save. Fantastic. Now, I don't really have a Windows client device to effectively demonstrate this experience just at the moment. I may come back to this and do this in another video to try and demonstrate that experience. But I think from the examination point of view and from a learning point of view, an administrative point of view, this is the good stuff. This is what you want to be learning, what you need to be learning from an admin's point of view, how to configure Windows Hello for Business in the Intune Admin Center. Okay, that's one down. So that is all the time that we're going to be spending in the Intune Admin Center. For the rest of this video, we are going to spend majority of our time over in the Entra Admin Center at entra.microsoft.com. Now, you can also get to this from the Azure portal at portal.azure.com, and then going to Active Directory, you can get to this same area that we're going to look at here for authentication methods and policies. So what I'm trying to do going forward, though, is that Entra is really the go-to admin center for all things identity and authentication these days. It's where Microsoft want you to work. So I'm trying to honor that. I'm trying to eat my own dog food, as the phrase goes. The only thing I don't like about the Entra Admin Center is the inability thus far to, no, I'm wrong, you can. Oh, that's way better. Do you know, I don't know how long that's been there. I feel pretty silly if it's been there all along, but on other Microsoft portals that collapse the side panel, the side menu, tends to be near the top. So I'm feeling a little foolish now, but for realism, I will leave this in the video so you can all have a good chuckle at me. But anyhow, what we need to look at here, and just going back to our study guide very briefly, we've looked at Windows Hello for Business. We need to look at how we implement and manage things like passwordless tokens and the Microsoft Authenticator app. So if we go back to here, let's just show you how I got there in actual fact. From entra.microsoft.com, we navigate down to, if it's not expanded, just Azure Active Directory, and you might have to just expand the whole thing when you first open it. And into protect and secure and authentication methods. And there we are. Fantastic. This is where we want to be. Let's collapse that side panel, because that is going to make me very happy. But here we can see some of the authentication methods that are available to us to enable. So let's have a look through them. We're in the policy section, and we've got some information here that tells us what this section is all about. Use this policy to configure the authentication methods that you may register and use. If a user is in scope for a method, they may use it to authenticate and for password reset. And some methods are not supported for certain scenarios. So click on the Learn More for that. Learn.microsoft.com. Learn, share, and repeat. If your tenant doesn't yet use combined security info registration, turn it on now. It's required to use this policy. Now, combined security info registration refers to the registration process for multi-factor authentication and self-service password reset. More historically, Microsoft 365 tenants had separate registration areas for these two security principles. But the combined registration experience is designed to save users time, so they're registering for both of these things in one experience. This has been available for quite a few years now, but it has more recently become the default experience. But if you have an older tenant where you've never explicitly enabled this, then just watch out for this and go and see how you turn that on and enable it. We've got some information here which is very important as well, is that on September the 30th of 2024, so we've got some time yet, but it'll come up quicker than we realize, but the legacy multi-factor authentication and self-service password reset policies are going to be deprecated, and you're going to need to manage all authentication methods right here in the Authentication Methods policy. So you need to use this control to manage your migration from legacy policies to the new unified policy. Again, you can learn more and you can click on Manage Migration to do that. But gone off on a little tangent there, but it's important to know. But we want to look at these authentication methods that we have available to us. Now we have things like, well, specifically in the learning guide, the study guide, it talked about Microsoft Authenticator. It talked about third-party software and OAuth tokens, and that relates to FIDO security keys as well, really. But there are other methods here available to you. And by default, these are all disabled. I've explicitly enabled two of these in my tenant already, as you can see, and they are targeted to all users. Let's take a look at each in turn. We'll go through the list in order. FIDO security key, or more precisely, a FIDO2 security key. Now, I've actually done a demonstration of setting up a FIDO2 security key previously, very recently, in fact, on one of my other channels, which I am fortunate to be a part of, which is Cloud Conversations, which I co-host with 4 other wonderful Microsoft MVPs. I'm going to link in this video, you should see it at the top of your screen just about now, to that video where you can see me setting up an actual FIDO2 security key. So do take a look at that and hopefully you'll find that useful. But to enable that, let's go in, and we've got two main sections, two main tabs in each of these authentication methodologies. We've got enable and target, so you've got to slide them in to enable it. And once you've enabled, you'll be able to explicitly include or exclude specific users and groups. So you can target all users, or you can select specific groups who you want to target those to. So I've enabled FIDO2 security key settings for all users. That's great. That's fine. I could have done that by groups as well. Then if we click on configure, we can see some of the settings that we are able to specify for this method. Under general, do we want to allow self-service setup? Yes or no. Enforce attestation? Yes or no again. Key restriction policy. Do we want to enforce any restrictions there? Restrict specific keys. Do we want to add a GUID there and an AA GUID or not? So I'm not going to change anything here, but if you wanted to do that, add AA GUID there, you'd have to enforce the key restrictions, and then at least one AA GUID must be provided to enforce those key restrictions. So if you clicked on allow there and that unlocks that grey out, you could then go in and do the necessary. So that is fine as it is. So I'll discard those changes that I've made there, and I'll go back into authentication methods. But do check out that video on FIDO2 security keys. The one that I set up in the video that is linked is a Fitian FIDO2 key, which I found to be very effective indeed. Works beautifully well. And it's basically, it's a bit like a USB stick which you insert into your laptop, and when you're logging into Microsoft 365, it will prompt you to insert the key and then touch the key to authenticate. So it's requiring a physical response. Rather than something you know, it's something you have. Okay, next, the Microsoft Authenticator app. And this ties into Passwordless as well. So if you want to set up the Passwordless number matching feature, you would do it in here under Microsoft Authenticator. So if we take a look in there, that one's enabled as well. Again, I've just enabled this to all users, and then we can specifically choose the authentication methods, the authentication modes more precisely, that you want to enforce here. So I've selected any, but you could just as easily set that to be passwordless or to push notification. Now, in the modern world of security threats, cybersecurity being what it is right now, I would probably recommend going for passwordless. I'll not change this one right now because I'm happy with that one the way it is just at the moment. But with that the way you want it to be, with the included users and groups, or excluded, important as well, you can now configure your settings for the Microsoft Authenticator app. And as it says here, if you don't know what this is an app that you can get on Android and iOS. You can download those free from those respective app stores. It's a flagship authentication method usable in password or simple push notification approval modes. And there we go, free to download. You can get more information from the Learn More. Okay, so note, users must be included as part of the Microsoft Authenticator targeted groups in the Enable and Target tab. That's, yeah, there we go, we've already done that. Do we want to allow the use of the Microsoft Authenticator one-time password? Yes or no. Then we've got some settings here. Require number matching for push notifications. So if the feature status is set to Microsoft managed, then it will be enabled by Microsoft at an appropriate time after the preview. So this is obviously a preview feature at the moment, and what we're seeing here is that number matching will begin to be enabled for all users of the Microsoft Authenticator app starting on the 8th of May 2023. So that's good information there that tells us about the end of that preview. So you can go with the Microsoft managed, and it'll remind you here that it'll enable it when Microsoft are ready for that. Or you can just enable it. You can explicitly enable it if you have the confidence that you're ready to do that. So we'll go for Microsoft managed in this example, and you can again include or exclude, target the users and groups that you want. Then we have the option to show application name in push and passwordless notifications. So if you've used the Authenticator app before and you've used it to be your secondary means of authentication when trying to authenticate to Microsoft 365, you may have seen various differences in what's included on that authentication. Sometimes you will see an application name. This application wants access. Do you want to authenticate? Do you want to allow this? So we can enable that there. A similar thing here, geographic location. In those notifications, you'll sometimes see a map and say, this user has tried to log in this location. So these are things that you can enable or disable as needed. So lots of good stuff there. And then finally at the bottom there, Microsoft Authenticator on companion applications. We can learn more about that one there, but same principle, you can set to Microsoft managed, enabled or disabled. So that's really how easy it is to configure the authentication methods for two methods already there. I'll just discard those for the moment because I don't really want to change those. So really in the In the new world that we're living in at the moment, I would probably say these are the two go-to methods that I would be happy with for an organization. I'd be less happy with things like SMS message as a means of authentication, with one-time passwords, although I do have that enabled. But the top two would be my go-to, but you can configure these ones here as well, and various other third-party software or auth tokens, for example. But that tells you a bit about the authentication methods in this first bullet point here. So excellent. Okay, so we've got a few more to go through, and we'll get to those next. Okay, next we're going to look at password protection, which is in the same location in the Microsoft Entra Admin Center and the Authentication Methods. And we were in Policies in the previous section, which we will now move down to the next one, Password Protection. And let's just collapse that little sidebar again and see what options we have on here. This is a very, very straightforward thing to configure, nice and simple, and very effective for protecting passwords. So a few settings in here that we need to be mindful of when configuring password protection, and we start with the custom smart lockout. So what is the lockout threshold? How many failed sign-ins are allowed on an account before its first lockout? If the first sign-in after a lockout also fails, then the account will lock out once again. So you have to measure the level of risk that is right for the organization in question. What is their appetite for risk? What is their posture? I would probably say, as somebody who was very risk averse, that 10 is probably too much. I would maybe take that down to no more than 5. And then we have the next one down, which is the lockout duration in seconds, the minimum length in seconds of each lockout. If an account locks out repeatedly, this duration increases. So I think 60 is certainly a good starting point. Then next we have a custom banned password. This is off by default, but we can set this to yes. And to enforce a custom list, what this does is that when enabled, the words in the list are used in the banned password system to prevent easy to guess passwords. So if we go on to the next one down, so a list of words, one per line, to prevent your users from using in their passwords. You should include words specific to the organization, such as their product, the trademarks, industries, local cities and towns, local sports teams. The list can contain up to 1,000 words. These are case insensitive, and common character substitutions are automatically considered. So put your banned password list in here. Now next, we have password protection for Windows Server Active Directory as well. So if you are working in a hybrid environment, if you have your on-premises Active Directory synchronized to Azure AD, then enable this here as well. So enable password protection on Windows Server Active Directory. And if set to yes, that password protection is turned on for Active Directory domain controllers when the appropriate agent is installed. So you're going to need to install an agent there in order to configure that. And this lovely Learn More button will take you to the relevant documentation on how to achieve that. So all of these links, if I've shared any of them and more, will be included in the description on this video. Finally, we have the mode options here, and the choices are audit, which is the default, or enforced. Now, if set to enforce, then users will be prevented from setting banned passwords and the attempt will be logged. If set to audit, however, the attempt is only going to be logged. So you can view in the audit logs on Microsoft 365 but the actual password protection will not be enforced. So there we go. Nice and simple, and highly recommend that is put into place without a doubt. Now, the one thing that I always mention when it relates to passwords is that Microsoft for a long time now have recommended, quite rightly, that you don't require password changes, that the enforcing password resets on a regular basis is disabled. So that's also something to remember with passwords, because the more modern authentication methodologies that we have in place, that multi-factor authentication and the authentication methods that we've been through in this video, they are the way to go in protecting your users and their authentication processes. Okay, next, let's take a look at self-service password reset, or SSPR. So we expand the side panel again, and under Azure Active Directory, if we go back into the Protect and Secure section where we are currently residing with authentication methods, then one down we have password reset. Now I've obviously got some unsaved edits there, but I'm happy with that. I will just OK that, and we will go into SSPR. And let's collapse that side panel again. I am loving that. Okay, here we go. Password reset properties. So what we have here is the ability, first and foremost, to enable self-service password reset at the top here. We have three settings: none, selected, and all. And this designates, as the information icon shows, whether users in this directory can reset their own password. Choose selected to restrict password reset to a limited group of users. And if you're rolling out this feature for the first time, then I would highly recommend doing exactly that, to test that in a pilot group as you are rolling out the feature. Another thing to remember is that in an earlier video, we enabled this feature in setting up Azure AD Connect. You have to enable that first in order for this to, well, not necessarily first, but it has to be enabled as part of this. So just have that in mind. Okay, so what we can do now is, by default, it's set to none. If you select all, then it's going to apply to all users, or you can get granular here and select groups of people to be targeted for SSPR, self-service password reset. Couldn't remember what it stood for there. There you go. How long have I been using this product? So we would select a group there, but just for the argument of demonstration, I'll just set that to all for just now. And once you're happy with this setting here, you can save it and then move on to the next section. So it is important to point out that any privileged administrators, such as global administrators, are set up for the ability to reset their own passwords in any case. Okay, next one down. Authentication methods. Now, authentication methods are things that are used in order to reset the password. So if you want to reset a password, then you have to complete a number of responses. And here is where you can set the number of methods required to reset. And this area here defines the number of alternative methods of identification a user in the directory must have in order to reset their password. That says it a lot better than I did. Okay, so number of methods. You can have one or two. So if we select two, then we can choose whether they are going to have to respond to a mobile app notification, a mobile app code, an email, a mobile phone challenge, an office phone challenge, so an actual desk phone that will ring, or some security questions. And you can toggle these on and off as needed. And security questions, if you enable that one, you can set the number of security questions that you want to register, and so on and so forth. So it's fairly simple to set up. I usually like to have this, even though I have it checked for this in this demo tenant, it must have been from a previous demo that I was doing, but I would tend to have a mobile app code, certainly. Mobile app notification, I'm never so keen on the notifications. I think having to input a code is very good. But again, this is all going to come down to the level of risk that your organization has a posture for, shall we say. So have a think about that when talking to your customers or setting this up for an organization. So there we go. So I'm just going to discard that because I'm happy that that's effective enough to demonstrate this. Registration for SSPR. So what we have here is require users to register when signing in. So this is really going to enforce the process. So when they sign in, if this is set to yes, unregistered users are going to be prompted to register their own authentication information. If set to no, then administrators must manually specify the necessary password reset authentication information in the properties for each user in the directory, or instruct users to go to the registration portal URL directly. There is a URL that you can supply to users, and they can click on that on demand and they can go and reset their password from there. So this is a good thing to have, especially if you want to get this rolled out and you want to enforce users to sign up for it. Then we have a setting here for the number of days before users are asked to reconfirm their authentication information. This designates how long before users are prompted to reconfirm existing authentication information is still valid, up to a maximum of 730 days. So you can choose this based on your organizational risk posture once again. We have some notification settings here as well, which can be applied. You can choose to notify the users on password reset. So this will determine whether or not users receive an email to their primary and alternate email address, which they will have to provide, which will notify them when their own password has been reset via the self-service password reset portal. Similarly, admins notify all admins when other admins have reset their password, and this determines whether or not all global administrators receive an email to their primary email address when other administrators reset their own passwords via the self-service password reset portal. We have some customization settings here. We can put in a customized help desk link, yes or no, and this designates whether or not the contact your administrator link that normally allows users to contact a service administrator directly is overridden to point to a custom location that you can enter here as required. There is the option for on-premises integration as well, and we don't have any agents that are capable of performing password write-back at the moment, so we would need to install a sync agent and set up a sync engine before installing password write-back or enabling password write-back. This is what we are seeing here due to the fact that I'm on a tenant that is not synchronized to an on-premises AD, but if you were on such a tenant, then you would see that. We have administrator policy as well, so we can see here just a reminder, an overview really of is SSPR enabled, the number of methods required, the methods available to administrators. We can look at activity in the audit logs as well, so we can see in audit logs here any entries for when password resets had taken place, and we have usage and insights as well, where we can see things like users registered for MFA, registered for SSPR, and so on and so forth. And we can send a support request from here as well. Okay, so last couple of sections in Implement and Manage Authentication. Let's take a look at multi-factor authentication, or MFA, and then we'll finish off with investigating and resolving authentication issues. So MFA first, let's get ourselves back into the Entra portal, and MFA is an interesting one because there are 2 or 3 different ways that you can get to it. What I will actually do before we get to that actually is I'll just open another tab and we'll just go to the Microsoft 365 Admin Center and users, active users, multi-factor authentication there. Okay, so here we can see that configuring multi-factor authentication can be done from this this area, and this has already been done on this particular tenant, and it's managed by conditional access. So what you can do is we can go right into conditional access. Now there is a legacy MFA portal which should be disappearing very, very soon. And that was the per user MFA portal, which I think we touched on slightly in an earlier video in the series actually. So really we shouldn't be setting up MFA on a per user basis going forward. There are really 3 ways of getting that done. Security defaults now, which comes with a brand new tenant implemented. And if not, then we should be using conditional access to implement MFA. Or we can do it through Azure AD identity protection as well. So from here, we can see that we've already configured it with conditional access. We can click on there to manage policies, and it will take us right into the Entra portal, and we can see the policies that we have in place. So let's just give us a bit more screen space again. With that lovely new feature that I've discovered while sharing this content with you. And we can see in conditional access here, we've got some MFA related policies. Require MFA for admins, require MFA for external and guest users. And we've got some settings here as well for block or legacy signings that don't support MFA. We've got require MFA and a password change when high-risk users are detected. And require MFA when risky sign-ins are detected. We'll come back to these ones at the bottom, these 2, because they tie into Azure AD identity protection, which we're going to get to in the next video in the series, or one coming up very soon. But let's just go ahead and take a look at what this looks like within conditional access. So require MFA for admins. If you do nothing else, then you absolutely have to have this. And what you do is go into user assignments. And as this was created from the manage section within the M365 admin portal, it's gone ahead and it's selected specific directory roles, the common ones like global admin, user admin, exchange admin. And you can select different ones if you want to. And what it's important to do, though, is to explicitly exclude your break glass account, also sometimes known as your emergency access account. These are accounts that you should only use in an absolute emergency, hence the name of them, break glass and emergency access. And they are there because conditional access is a very powerful animal, and we'll get more into conditional access in further videos for sure, but this is specifically in relation to MFA. But always exclude your break glass account from the process. Cloud apps or actions, it's selected to all cloud apps here. We've got no particular conditions here. We'll see some conditions in those identity protection ones, which we'll get to in one of the upcoming videos. And then we get to the controls, access controls. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to grant access, but require multi-factor authentication. And it's giving us a little bit of a guide here. Consider testing the new require authentication strength public preview. And we can get to learn more here as well. So require authentication strength, if we check onto that one, which users must use specific authentication methods based on the authentication strength policies applied. So I'll include some links to that in the chat. So but we can't have that selected there if we've got require MFA selected. So we can only select that if we unselect multi-factor authentication. So to show you a little bit more about that, so require authentication strength, we've got some options there. Multi-factor authentication, combinations of methods that, I don't know why that's not displaying too effectively, but if we select that one, as it's that's very unfriendly. Combinations of methods, passwordless MFA, phishing resistant MFA. The screen real estate on here is not so great, but these are other methods of authentication strength, and that's a fairly recent addition to the options in conditional access for setting MFA. So really, in short, you should be setting up MFA in one of those three ways. Definitely not per user MFA anymore, because that experience is being deprecated, so don't use that from the admin center. You use the method that we saw here to get us to Entra by managing it and setting up conditional access policies, or use Azure AD identity protection in conjunction with conditional access, which we'll go into in more detail in the next video, as I said. So that hopefully gives you an idea of MFA. Nice and simple, and the experience of MFA, I'm hoping and very sure of the fact that you will all be very familiar with the experience of logging in using MFA to the M365 portal. You've seen it enough in the videos that I've shared so far, where you put your username and password in, and then you get challenged for a second form of authentication, be that the Authenticator App or a FIDO token or whatever else. So lots of documentation about MFA will be included in the description for this video, but that is it from a conditional access point of view. Watch out for identity protection in the next video, and you can see earlier on in this video series how we applied it how it was applied, shall we say, by using security defaults. Okay, final step on our journey here is to just have a look at some of the monitoring capabilities to troubleshoot things within Azure AD. And I've got this open in the Azure portal, but similarly you can get there via the Entra portal as well, just demonstrating how the same result can be achieved by those different portals. So here we go. In Entra, that's under monitoring and health, and we can see everything like sign-in logs, for example. This is going to give us sign-in events. So when people have signed in, the date, the request ID, the user, the application, so it's what portal it is, whether it was successful, interrupted, or whatever else. And you can click on these and get lots of good detail on the flyout panel: basic info, location, device info, authentication details, conditional access, if it was in reporting only mode for conditional access as well. Auditing logs, again, you can get some logs here to show activity for what's been going on in relation to Azure AD. With an Entra, we can look at things like diagnostic settings as well, and provisioning logs. But for that, if we click onto these, you're going to need an Azure subscription to use that capability. So take a look in the documents that I've referenced in the description to learn more about that. But because we're not going to go into that level of depth, and indeed, you probably don't need that level of depth, more than a general awareness in relation to if you're taking the exam, for example. So with that, I think we have been through all of this section here: implement and manage authentication. Some of it at a higher level than others. We've not really had the opportunity to investigate or resolve, but I've pointed you in the right direction of where to look, and you get more information on those links in the description. So there we go. And that's it for another video, folks. Absolutely brilliant. In the next video, we are going to close out the identity and access section of the MS-102 exam study guide. And we're going to be focusing on Azure AD identity protection. We're going to get deeper into conditional access as well. So you'll note in this video, we didn't really do a lot with conditional access. We're going to look a lot more into those topics in the next video, which will tie up our identity and access portion of the exam guide, and then we're really moving on to some great stuff after that with Defender for Office 365 and Endpoint, and then rounding things off in this series with a bit of Microsoft Purview. So hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks for your time as always. Please do subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate it when you do that. Please like, please share, please leave me some comments. Let me know what your experience has been with implementing the technologies, either live or in test, that we've been discussing on this video series. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much. We'll see you on the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.